Welcome to Fort Worth 148's podcast, where we meet to discuss Masonic topics and strive to build value in the brotherhood. The opinions and statements of the participants do not represent any positions or stance of any Grand Lodge or Lodge and are solely the viewpoints of the participants. Welcome back to the podcast, brother. This is Rhit Moore, past master and current secretary of Fort Worth 148.
Grant Gates, current junior warden with 148.
Billy Hamilton, current senior steward for 148.
And this is Gabe Jagush, Master Mason with Fort Worth 148.
Well, it's good to be back, bros. It's been a while we've met because we did the Chuck Dunning all in one setting, and it's been almost a month. I've been anxious.
Yeah, I know we released that one in two parts, so that one, that was a long episode. I'm really glad we did it. It's been pointed out to me that the audio mastering was not consistent. I'm going to try and fix that for the next episodes. I am not a professional audio mixer, and I have no idea what I'm doing. So Rhit told me, hey, did you hear this? And I went, no, I haven't. Tell me more. Turns out that my voice is super quiet on the last recording, and everyone else is incredibly loud. So we're going to try and avoid that.
It's quiet, not super quiet.
Yeah. So, but it didn't sound that way on the headphones in the studio, but apparently it happens in a car. So, dear audience, I'm not trying to shock you to death. So,
and dude, I have been in hyperdrive about meditation and contemplation in kind of intertwined in our degrees and ritual work. Oh my gosh, it's everywhere. It's like my spidey sense was turned on, And I've told y'all about a few of them. I won't mention here to give stuff away, but wow, it's all throughout our ritual.
Yep. And I've been sitting with that for me in a lot of my church practices and a lot of my religious more religious activities and stuff. I've been thinking about that actively as well. I've always been really interested by contemplative Christianity and stuff, and I was a practicing Buddhist for a number of years, and so like now I'm very actively looking at my faith itself, not just Masonry, but my religious practice as well.
Yeah,
a more contemplative aspect. So, audience, today we are getting together for our first Quarryman's Roundtable of 2018, and so basically what we've talked about is that every few months we're going to put together a roundtable discussion episode so that we can just sit and discuss questions as opposed to tackling one specific subject. And so usually during each episode that we do, before we kick into the main content, we'll discuss one or two questions, sometimes even three, between ourselves and the guest before we launch into the main subject. Quarryman's Roundtable episodes are just discussion questions. It's a little bit more freeform. It's a little bit more relaxed, and it's a different sort of discussion environment. So we like them a lot. We did a few of them last year for the holiday season, and we're doing one right now. So June is a busy season. So this is a great. June is a busy season. So this is a great episode for us to do.
Yes, absolutely. And I always enjoy these, man. They're great because you always out in your travels get these questions that come up, either somebody comes up and asks or it pops into your mind. And it's a good discussion, to kind of get that word out there. If nothing else, getting people contemplating.
Yep. Oh, there's that word again. So these questions are all questions that there's numerous sources, but either I've stolen them from Reddit, we've stolen them from Facebook, or people have asked them to us, whether it's digitally or online. Digitally and online are the same thing, now that I think about it, or in person. Because sometimes, we get people that walk up to us and ask us, maybe not necessarily in the context of being podcast hosts, but they ask us questions, and we think about them for a while. So,
right, yeah. And sometimes they're brought up just by talking with each other, and it's like, hey, that's something we should talk about on the podcast.
That's probably 80% of them. Absolutely.
And and some of them just aren't enough to fill one episode with. You know, it may be a question you can knock out in 5 or 6 minutes that you want to put on there, but you can't do a whole episode on it. So this gives us a chance to gather up the randoms from, you know, the quarter and talk about them.
Yeah.
So I didn't write this one down, but I'm going to jump right in because something hit me pretty hard the other day when Mark McCarran finally sent his bio over.
Mm-hmm.
But
do you want to give it a little bit of background on that one?
Well, I was going to, but the thing that hit me is that, and I've been working on it for so long, is that we finally killed the progressive lineup. All 3 candidates we have running for the junior warden's position, none of them are senior deacon.
Yep.
You know, and I see that as such a great thing. So backstory on that is we proposed, it's not really it was voted in as a rule, but it's more as kind of a guide on guys that want to be officers, who they would go to, who appoints who, and how you make yourself available to run for the South, you know, to let people know if you want to, so you know how to become an officer. And we've got 3 guys running, you know, and it's just like, wow. I told my cousin, he's a past master he's the one that got me into Masonry. And
Sonny?
this was something we were very passionate about. And I told him, texted him after it hit me, because what did we pass that? A month and a half ago?
About a month ago. I think we read it at one meeting and then we passed it at another.
Yeah, we passed it in our May stated, so.
And it was kind of at the back of my head that would happen, you know, kind of thing. But it was more laying out a path for the newer guys, because the way it was is that the officers going out nominated who they thought would be best. And that's just not exactly fair when you have multiple guys wanting that position. That's the lodge's decision. But yet they didn't quite know how to make that known. So we just laid out guidelines for that. And wow.
And it was very hard to make it known without sounding like you were campaigning for yourself.
Yep.
Is the other issue that this really snuffed out. It kind of killed the idea of, okay, well, I got to be buddies with this guy. Otherwise, I'm never going to be an officer. It's like, no. Let's put out something, because we came into an abundance of qualified leaders in our lodge. We have so many guys who could jump right in and be a leader. It was really hard to have presumably, if I'm heading to the West, it's really hard to sit down and pick somebody out of the group of guys that we have right now. It just didn't feel good to try to do that.
Well, and even further backstory, because we are not, this is something that was done long ago in our lodge, and it's the model Grand Lodge uses. But when it was just a handful of us there, it was the principal officers begging someone to be junior warden. Can you do it, please? You know, and they would have a time commitment. So we'd go to the next guy, please, would you? And they're like, oh, okay, you know. I went from senior deacon to senior warden. You know, there was people falling out of line, and there wasn't enough to fill the roles. You know, I know one year we had 5 installed officers.
Oof. Wow.
That was just like 5 or 6 years ago, too.
So needless to say, things have improved substantially in our lodge.
Oh, I never dreamed it would change that fast. But you just don't kind of account for that snowball effect. You know, once it starts getting bigger and picking up steam, then it just gets bigger at an exponential rate. Kind of like compounding interest. It's what we're doing. We compound interest on our master's wages. No, I just wanted to point that out, because that was like a real, wow. You keep your nose down, keep working, things will change.
Yeah, and it's good that you brought that up, because I think that it's important for other brethren to know ideas that we're trying out, right? So this is, all the guys that have made themselves available for the South and Fort Worth Lodge, like, they're all guinea pigs, right? Like, all the officers, including the guys that are not looking at junior warden, including the guys who are said, hey, I'm interested in being senior deacon. Hey, I'm interested in being marshal or whatever. Or even the guys who have already been elected as officers and are going to go, presumably, on to advance in rank. We're all guinea pigs here, and we're going to let you all know how this goes because we think this is a new, exciting idea for an individual lodge to try. And it's kind of neat. So.
Well, and when Gabe says guinea pig, and Rhit, your dad said it the best the other night when we were having a little planning meeting, that really the chairs used to be a way of training men in leadership.
Yeah.
And the chairs had defined roles, and you learned your role by learning from the guy who held the chair before you. So the junior steward learns from the senior steward, and the senior steward is learning from the junior deacon, so on and so forth. How to accomplish the next role. And Masonry, by and large, has lost that feel to it because you haven't had large active memberships where you have guys to fill all those roles, get the experience and pass that knowledge down. At some point there was a break when lodges started shrinking where that knowledge either packed up and left the lodge or passed on, right? We lost that. So when we're being guinea pigs, we got to figure out, hey, how do we establish an effective role for our stewards? How are we effective in today's world? You know, It's not just coming up to the kitchen and making spaghetti for everybody. In today's world, you know, with Facebook and social media, you can have an event pop up and you got a week to get it done. How do we make it effective in today's world? So it's going to be fun. And it is kind of a grand experiment that we're doing on ourselves. The hypothesis is that it'll work.
Well, I mean, it's
like
no
that. It's a
different
very
than
confident hypothesis. We think it'll work.
Yeah, we'll get it done.
it's just a much smaller scale of what they do at Grand Lodge. So, you know, the two key things that we have gotten real good about, and I think it's the cornerstone of any successful lodge, is high standards, looking to get higher, and accountability. You got those two things, you're going to be successful. You know, because this isn't going to work, you know, what we're doing if we don't hold each other accountable for, you know, no electioneering, no picking your favorites and third party campaigning, you know, none of that stuff, which we're doing a fine job at. But let's see what it's like 4 or 5 years down the road.
Yeah, because who knows? This might be a disaster. But, you know, right now it seems like a great idea. So let's do it.
Yep. And it will be.
And from those two things you mentioned, too, it seems like accountability is probably the most important one because that naturally leads to higher standards.
You got it. You got it. I just don't want to be held accountable to crappy standards.
There you go.
Well, a lot of it comes down to, you know, the way we're doing this falls under the moniker of be cool, bro. We're going to be cool to each other, and we're going to figure out ways to make it better. And if we screw up, we'll just keep being cool to each other and figure out a new way to do it. So, yeah, I'm excited about it.
Shall
we? All right. Well, Gabe, one question you put on, Gabe is very kind and makes us a list of basically a little show guide before every show. It's really nice of him to do that. One question you have on here that I know I can answer and will be fun is, how do you best clean an apron? Pretty basic, but I was excited to see that one. Guys, if you have not discovered this beautiful thing called saddle soap, you need to go get it.
I thought you were going to say lamb's blood.
Yeah. Right?
Please tell me lamb's blood is a brand, not an item.
No. Yeah. What you need to do is you need to go get a baby lamb and sacrifice it over top of your apron and then let the baby lamb blood sit on there for 24 hours. That's
There you go, folks. There's all the Masonic secrets exposed right there.
He's
Right
talking
there.
literally cleaning out. Yeah, I was thinking spiritual cleaning.
Spiritual cleaning. There we go. Yeah, guys, saddle soap, microfibers. All right, get the saddle soap well mixed so it doesn't have a yellow hue to it anymore. Use a clean microfiber rag to scrub it like you're scrubbing with a sponge. Clean it with a dry portion of the microfiber rag. It will look brand new. The strings can be a little tricky. I have found that the Griot's Garage interior detailer for your car works wonders on the strings or tassels. It gets all the gunk off of it.
I
So
love that. Yeah, and then saddle soap is kind of like a darker brown color, right?
right, and that's why you want to use warm water when you're doing the mix. That way, because some light leathers you can stain it if you have it real heavy on there. The color will stain a little bit, or it'll stain the strings in there. So you want to make sure you've mixed it very well so that the color is light. That way, it won't stain the strings.
Yeah, and do not confuse saddle soap. If you see brown soap in the store, make sure it is saddle soap and not pine tar soap. Pine tar soap will stain a lot of stuff.
The correct saddle soap has a yellow. It's a black tin with a yellow lid. It's like $4 at the feed store. It's a paste, and that's the correct stuff. That's what you want.
And it smells amazing.
And it smells amazing. And I use it to clean the leather in my wife's car, and basically any leather product. It is kind of a miracle on. So there you go. That's how you clean an apron.
You could do that right before you pass away, and you nice clean apron.
Rhit, you prefer your aprons dirty, correct?
You got it. Yeah. I don't mind a little scuff on it.
Yeah,
I want to get up there and then be like, "Ooh, you've been working."
And I do kind of like that. Like, I love the idea of an apron that has a little bit of wear and tear on it from not too much, but just enough that you're like, yeah, this guy was wearing this. Like, obviously, if it's like spaghetti stains, like that's not great.
Yeah,
but,
that's crazy.
I have a small stain that I mostly scrubbed out on my apron from. It's an oil stain from when I was helping to move like a tractor trailer type thing at an outdoor degree. So it's like I was actually working. So, but it's mostly scrubbed out, but you can still kind of like, what is that?
Hey man, bring that over. I bet you I can get that out.
Yeah.
I got, saddle soap. So I'm sure we can get that taken care of.
No, but I do clean mine every once in a while, just with a damp rag to get the dirt off of it. But I like a worn apron, not a dirty,
Yeah, and there's a caveat here. Try to clean newer aprons. If you have inherited, like your grandfather's apron, just stick to maybe a clear moisturizer. Don't try to clean an old apron, right? Because some of the old aprons may not stand up to cleaning anymore.
And make sure the apron is actually leather before you hit it with saddle soap.
Oh, God,
saddle soap will do no favors to vinyl. It will stain vinyl. So if you have a leatherette apron, you're on your own. I don't know how to clean that. Yep. But if you have a leather apron, saddle soap's the noise.
Pleather or leatherette or whatever, like at that point, yeah, you're just going to have to go at it with a damp rag.
Right.
But so one of the questions I had was, and this one's not too complicated, we've brought this subject up on the podcast before. Are there rules about interacting with co-masons and women masons? It probably doesn't come up that often, but in the hypothetical case where a regular mason is married to a woman mason, could they discuss their Masonic activities openly? That was by Sweatin' to the Oldies on the Freemasonry subreddit.
I have no idea how that works. Gabe, what have you discovered on this topic? Because I really don't have a clue.
Basically, like the big phrase here is holding Masonic communications, right?
Uh-huh.
Now, you can talk about, and you can walk up to any non-Mason and tell them, hey, Like my lodge voted on this. Well, jurisdictional stuff applies, and so does law handbook stuff. But generally speaking, you can discuss the outcomes of your committee reports and the way the meeting went, and even if Brother Joe Schmo stood up and was kind of a douche in the meeting, right? Like you can talk about that, right? There's no problem with that. However, whether or not you voted for somebody, the Masonic words, right? Like the passwords, words, grips, pass grips, the anything that is ciphered content. So in Blue Lodge, literally almost all of the degree, with the exception of monitorial passages. In the York Rite, the obligations and pass grips, right? You can't discuss those with non-Masons. So legally speaking, for regular Masons, you have to treat co-Masons and women Masons as non-Masons. Now, does that mean you should disrespect them? No. Right? You should treat them with as much respect as you should accord to any other person, right? You just need to be aware that you just can't discuss stuff. And you can even enjoy Masonic conversation, not Masonic communication, but if you want to talk about, your theories on the Hiramic myth without going into detail about the actual wording of the ritual, go for it. If you want to talk about the esoteric content of, of symbolism that you see in certain degrees, go for it. That's not Masonic communication, right? It's about Masonry, right? But it's not the same thing. Basically, it boils down to you cannot sit in lodge well. And I know this is a rather free-form interpretation of that. But it is the most liberal interpretation that I can find that still falls within good faith of the rules we have to follow. So, now, if you want to take a more conservative approach on that, there's nothing wrong with it. But
yeah, that's always been silly to me because I remember before we recognized Prince Hall, is like you can't even associate with him. I'm like, you're crazy.
No, that was nuts.
I can philosophize with anybody I want to. Especially anything that's written. There's so much you can talk about. Open that monitor and working tools, they're in print. So discuss that with your wife, But it's also pretty simple that we keep these things secret, It's part of our obligation, of course, but it kind of adds to the camaraderie of the whole thing. So it's silly that people ask, can I talk about the degrees? It's like, no, you can't tell them about it.
Yeah. And so, and there's avenues where you can safely discuss these things. I'm a member of this organization called the Masonic Philosophical Society. And even though it has Masonic in the name, it is not a Masonic organization. It is a philosophical society about Masonry, right? Non-Masons can join. And the reason why they've stated that non-Masons can join is so that both regular and irregular Masons can join, and they get together and they do educational symposiums on all sorts of stuff. And everybody knows you don't talk about the secrets. You don't talk about, the words and everything like that. But as long as everyone plays along, nobody is hurt.
And if you took the scope of what you could discuss in Masonry and put it in a pie chart, about 8%, maybe 10 would be secret that we couldn't discuss. So it's, it's silly.
And I mean, let's be real though. I can send you guys a PNG file or a JPEG file of the Masonic grips and pass grips that I found on Pinterest. I was looking at, all sorts of stuff, and I was like, wow, it's right there. Okay.
Well, and I think the key answer here is you can certainly talk to them about anything that you can talk with anybody else about. And I think a lot of Masons have this misconception that there's more secrets and more things that we can't talk about than there really are.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. That's all I got to say about that.
It's like I said, it's not terribly dangerous. We can play nice.
Yeah.
All right. So this one was a conversation that actually Gabe and I were having with each other. And the question was, what officers can open and run a tiled lodge meeting?
Y'all want me to take this one?
Yeah, you're
Please.
the legal veteran here.
Sweet. So you're going to be looking at, what is it? Article 269. If the worshipful master and wardens are absent, because it falls in concession, worshipful master is gone, senior warden runs it. If the senior warden and worshipful master is gone, junior warden can run it. If they're all absent, then how do you put this? The last past master opens
The immediate
lodge.
past master.
There you go. So if the JPM's there, he opens it. If he's not, the guy that served, before him, so on and so forth. Back to the last past master that's there present, they preside over the meeting. If there is no past master there, you cannot open a lodge. He has to be a member, a past master of that lodge. So
a visiting past master wouldn't qualify.
No.
Does not
Okay.
qualify. Another things to point out on that. So if the senior warden fills the worshipful master's chair because he's out of town, and that happens, the junior warden does not bump up to senior warden. You hire a pro tem senior warden, usually a past master, whoever knows it. It doesn't matter. It can be any master mason, and in that fact, it doesn't even have to be a master mason, unless you're voting.
And the reason for that is actually kind of interesting. I was looking up if somebody walks into a meeting and they were late or whatever, whether or not they could just sit in and not fill their officer station, right? For the dais, not the dais officers, for the principal officers, right? They must reassume their station if they're in the meeting. And it's not explicitly stated that way in the law book. However, the jewels of the worshipful master, senior warden, and junior warden are what's called the immovable jewels. If one of those officers leaves that chair outside of the prescribed tactics in a degree, he must leave that jewel on that chair, right? And somebody else has to assume it.
Yeah, they would actually get a pro tem. They do it in the Grand Lodge all the time. Grand Junior Warden's got to use the restroom. They'll ask somebody to come up, take the jewel. That's the same thing.
Same thing.
Any time that lodge is open, there's only one time, and it's in a degree, that Junior Warden station doesn't have somebody there.
Right.
And you see it all the time. Like when the lecture goes on, everybody gets in that corner.
Yeah.
Those two chairs should actually be filled because the lodge is open.
Exactly.
But it's kind of gone away.
So where it comes into play, that they cannot simply pass on. If you are a principal officer and you're at the meeting, you must fill that station because those jewels must remain in their stations. And as a officer, you cannot appear in the lodge without being clothed as such, right? So if you're the senior warden or the worshipful master or the junior warden, if you are in the lodge, you must be clothed as the officer that you are, which means that you must sit in that seat if you are in the lodge room.
So the worshipful master has the prerogative to appoint a past master to run the lodge, and he sit on the sidelines.
He does he?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
How does that work, though?
He rules it like the sun and moon. He is the ultimate authority when that lodge is open. So that's his prerogative. Same thing if the senior warden, if the worshipful master is gone and the senior warden he now is bumped up to the ultimate leader, the worshipful master. He can appoint a past master to run the lodge, and he's sit in the west.
But only the worshipful master or acting worshipful master can do that, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
You got it. Yeah. If you are Marshal and they ask you, you're an installed Marshal or senior deacon, whatever, and they ask you to sit in the west or south, you cannot do that. You got to sit in the seat that you were installed if you're present. And that one exception is the worshipful master. Granted, there's times when you just don't have enough, and you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, sometimes you just got to play it by ear. But
So
All right.
I've got some other interesting tidbits on that, though. So let's say, and it's a weird scenario, but their worshipful master, the lodge has been opened, and for some reason, the 3 principal officers left, and there's no past masters there. So nobody has the authority to open or close lodge, but it's already open. If they're gone, it automatically closes.
oh, interesting. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
That is the only time that I can think of to where it's stated in our law that it's automatically closed. Of course, the worshipful master can hammer that gavel and say, we're done. If things are getting out of hand and he's lost control and people just will not be controlled, he can slam that gavel and say, we're done. It's not used, but of course, he has that authority.
So the meeting, once it's begun, if some condition happens to where you're no longer able to meet the indispensable number to hold the meeting, it automatically shuts down and it's closed.
Yeah, even if you had enough to hold the lodge, if there's no one to preside in the east, which is the 3 principal officers or a past master, it automatically closes. Really, the only scenario I can think of that is like I heard of, they would go to refreshment and then go eat in the lobby and wait for certain people to leave, and then they would go back in and open it up and vote on whatever. I've heard horror stories like that.
Oh, wow.
So if they
Yeah,
were
that's
actually,
not shady.
oh yeah, big time. It was kind of a weird scenario though, because it was for a good reason, but shady. Anyway, if they were to leave and nobody could find them or get a hold of them, they very well would have a right to close that lodge right then. It'd be automatically closed. So I thought that was pretty interesting when I was reading. I didn't realize it would auto close, and that's such a rare scenario, but it's in there. Do you know who can sit in the east during a degree?
My understanding is that any Master Mason, right?
That's it. There is a misconception out there that you have to be a past master or an officer to confer a degree, and that is not right. Any proficient, I should say, Master Mason can do it.
All right.
This was the cool thing I found out, though. So, obviously, if the Grand Master is not at Grand Lodge, the deputy takes over, right?
Right.
So, if the deputy, Grand Master aren't there, Senior Warden takes over. Same thing if Senior Warden's not there, the Junior Warden takes over. What if all of those guys are not at Grand Lodge? Who takes the Grand East?
I would assume either a... Okay. I feel like this is a trick question. I'm going to say either the immediate past Grand Master or a weird position like the Grand Marshal or the Grand Pursuivant or something like that.
Billy, what do you think?
I don't know. I was going to go with the immediate past Grandmaster or the next closest junior past master.
Those are very good guesses. Grant, you got one?
Man, I mean, I'm thinking it has to be a past Grand Master, but I'm sure that's wrong.
Rhit is just so thrilled. He's so
And you
thrilled.
would be wrong. I was like, wow, that's cool. So if all of those guys are gone, the sitting worshipful master of the oldest charter lodge present
Get out of
takes the
here,
Grand
Billy.
East. You got it.
Whew, that would be really something.
Yeah, so like Holland Lodge is always there. They're number
Right.
one. So their master would become Grand Master.
Pro tem.
You got
Pro-tem,
it.
yeah.
Pro tem,
Okay.
absolutely. And they have the prerogative to let a past Grand Master run it. Because hell, you would have to be pretty audacious to see like, yeah, I'll run the show.
How about you do
So
it? How about for yucks, you do it anyway?
You could have that guy that was like, yeah, I'm taking the gavel, baby.
That would be a ton of fun.
Be right back. Affiliating with Holland Lodge.
Right? Like I would be that guy if they're like, oh yeah, it says you could do this or appoint somebody. I'm like, yeah, give me the gavel. Come on,
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna go talk for a minute.
First order of business is an edict.
You must have a balanced budget. Your dues must balance your budget. Thank you. All right, moving on.
I don't even want to say what I'd bring back. I'll get in trouble for it.
I like this idea.
Hey, Rick, can you tell us and we'll just cut it?
Well, let me give you a hint. It is adjoining the lodge. It would be.
I like it.
If that gives you a clue.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I know now. I got it. Yeah.
And now
No, but
all our listeners are left in the dark.
There's another clue. But I thought that was cool. I never knew that the sitting worshipful master. I was like, wow, what if that ever came to happen? That'd be interesting. But they got that in there.
I guess then that would make sense, right? Because the way you form a Grand Lodge in the first place is you have to have representatives of 3 lodges. So I guess it kind of makes sense that it goes back to that, which 3 lodges are represented, they get to take the East.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is prestigious. Immediately I thought, I wonder if Holland has like a training to where, like, just in case you have to take the Grand East, here's a couple of tips.
Right.
That's so neat.
Still like last survivor training for Masonic lodges.
Yeah. It totally made me think of like when they have the State of the Union. What is it? It's different all the time, but like the Secretary of Interior will be out because if it's bombed, he would take presidency. Some officials always left out of that big State of the Union because everybody's there. Somebody would have to, and he'd be so unprepared.
So I have a question here that I thought was kind of fun. It's, I'm looking for the English name for my new office function. Hi guys, if all goes well, I'll have my first officer function. I'm looking for the English name. It's the officer that can correct the worshipful master, that does the toasts, and in Holland wages a judgment for the brother that did a presentation, e.g. het geweten. Does anyone know the English name? And that was posted by With New Eyes on the Freemasonry subreddit. And so I get the feeling that this is one of those officerships that does not have a one-to-one correspondence, but in Texas, to my understanding, this would be the Marshal, right? The Marshal is supposed to be the guy who directs the ceremonies, right? Like, he's the one that runs the ritual, right? So, like, the Master of Ceremonies is in charge of preparing the room. He's in charge of preparing the candidate, helping the senior deacon prepare the candidate, right? And he's in charge of, like, making sure the jewels are in the right places and everything like that. He functions very similar to the Grand Pursuivant, right? But he's like the Pursuivant at the lodge level. The Marshal does strictly ritual, right? So for degrees, he and the Master of Ceremonies work together, right? So Master of Ceremonies takes care of the physical layout of everything, and then the Marshal takes care of the ritualistic integrity, right? So if you guys want to do something where only one person in your lodge is the prompter, it should be the Marshal, right? Or, ideally it should be the Marshal, right? You appoint somebody to be Marshal who's competent, right? In other jurisdictions, is going to be the Director of Ceremonies, the Ritual Director, or the Preceptor. So that's just kind of something I wanted to just pop in and answer real quick.
And that kind of makes sense. Last weekend, I was actually at the Grand Rainbow Assembly in Oklahoma, and my wife is a former Grand Rainbow officer for Oklahoma. And she always tells me how awesome they do their ritual, right? That, it's a requirement. You have to have everything memorized, and you'll never see, a book open at Grand Assembly. And so we're sitting there, And off on the side, but on the stage, I see one of the girls has the book open the entire meeting. And so I asked my wife about it, and she said that is the Grand Marshal. She corrects the work for everybody. She is the only person allowed to have it. And so combined with this question, it makes perfect sense.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that's just kind of something that I thought, because, we've talked about the concept before of like trying not to have corrections flying at you from the sidelines from all directions.
Right.
Making it
Because that's
clear
distracting.
making it clear to everyone that the marshal is the only one permitted to make corrections is a fantastic idea. That's why usually in a lot of lodges you see that the marshal is a past master, right? And a lot of times they'll hold an A certificate. So, let's see.
That kind of leads right into the question I had. Do candidates have to be, what proficiency do they have to be to pass? On the Q&A for the entered apprentice and fellow craft and masters.
Are you talking
Well-
like, is there some sort of standard?
Yeah. Is there a standard for that?
Not in Texas. The standard is what is approved and voted on by the brethren. I
Yeah.
mean, and there are lodges that are rumored out there, if they have someone they would like to hurry through the degrees, they'll get through 2 questions and someone will stand up and ask
That-
for a vote to declare them proficient and get a second and move on.
Right.
But that's not legal.
Yes.
They have to provide an answer to every question.
You got it. So really the reason I bring this up is because I've worked with every kind of candidate there is, where English is their second language, guys that can just gobble it up and they learn it better than you know it. Then you have those guys that just really and truly totally grasp the concept of what's going on, but have a hard time not needing more prompting than usual. So say every other question, they get stumped up either by nerves or, everybody's brain works different. So there could be somebody out there that is extremely savvy and wise, but it's not necessarily the greatest at memorizing. They don't read a lot, all that kind of stuff, but they'd still make a stellar Mason. I bring it up because lodges should know they have the freedom to pass those guys, in their proficiency, even though they needed more prompting than usual.
Yeah.
Oh,
The key to that whole thing, though, is that because more important than being a parrot is understanding the meanings. If they don't understand that part of it, that's when I have an issue with it.
I mean, there was a master mason in our lodge. We were doing our proficiency work at the same time, and we would sit down and work together. And when it was me and him, he was better than I was. But when we did our proficiencies, he couldn't get a word out. I mean,
Yep.
and I'm, you're looking at him and you're like, I know you know this. Come on, man, you're good. You got it. You got it. And he would just get nervous, and you'd prompt him, and he'd click out the answer, and you'd prompt him, and he'd click out the answer like he knew it like the back of his hand. But he just had a lot of trouble with it.
No.
He knew his stuff, but yeah, it happens.
No, and that's part of that's part of the training of becoming a better man is getting in front of those and working through that. But it shouldn't be to an extent it's a punishment, because they may come into your lodge and be one of the most active, greatest master masons that never take on the role of officer because memorizing is not their strong point. But you should realize there's an alternative. They should be able to we're not talking about somebody that just can't memorize anything here. Obviously, something's going on up there that they need to deal with outside of masonry, because it's not that hard to memorize. But there's a lot of factors that go into what's perfect. And, I think back to like Sam, he told me a story to where they would put, I think, 5 matchsticks on the altar. And every time you messed up, they'd break a matchstick. And when the 5th one was broke, you were done.
Wow.
You were not proficient. And where that may make sense when you're raising, 5 or 6 Master Masons a month, which is what they were doing back then. That may make sense, but I don't really even think it does then, because what are you teaching them? How to be a parrot, and it's much deeper than that.
Yeah. Or how to be a jerk to each other. I mean, that's just kind
Yeah.
of mean. Come on, man. That's not cool.
Oh
So,
man.
so here's a follow-up question to that then, right? So like say that take the instance of the guy who he could do it in private, but he can't do it before the lodge. Is it acceptable at that point, before you even get into voting, to ask them to step out for the lodge to confer amongst themselves and determine, does he really know it? Is it an issue, that, to talk to maybe their mentor or their instructor and determine, is this something that he's got some kind of block that he can't do it in front of people?
That's actually a really good question, because that is training of your instructors. Your instructor the instructor should never let that candidate say, I'm ready for a proficiency before he's ready. You do not want to embarrass him. The instructor's not going to know he's going to go up there and get jammed up. You know what I mean? Because of nerves. But he does know in private that it's been spot on. So he's like, man, you're ready. Let's go. So it should be kind of a two-prong. Instructor feels they're ready. They feel they're ready. But if you take him up there before he's ready, you're kind of self-defeating the whole thing, because it should be a confidence-building moment. And when it's not, it's bad news. Because it's embarrassing to get up there and really jack it up. I know who you're talking about, and I remember it, and he was as red as he could be. And I'd worked with him on many occasions by myself, and the guy knew it well. And I felt bad for him. It was like, I don't think he remembers his name right now.
Right. Well, and I mean, sometimes it does happen to all of us, right? Like in the middle of ritual, sometimes it's like, I've done this word perfect for the past 2 weeks, and now I'm in front of the candidate, and it's like, it just goes out of my head. And it's like, crap.
Yep.
What's the next part? Yeah.
No, absolutely. That thought just slips away like it's been lubed up, and it's like, that's gone. What am I doing? So, you got to realize what's going on there, because it's a good man getting better. So we should use it that way. And that's the whole process, from learning your memory work and presenting it to lodge to going through the chairs. It's all training, to become better. And, my dad and I when we drove home the other night, we talked about how the chairs, when they're working right, they train leaders, like we mentioned earlier in the podcast. And, if you look at our lodge, there was like a 10 or 20 year period to where we had like 3 or 4 Grand Masters. And it's because they were trained in our lodge to be leaders. And that was recognized. I think it says a lot that we had 4 people, or I think it was 3, elected Grand Master within like a 30-year period. So you get them working right, they'll pump out some real leaders.
So, this one was by Widow's Favorite Son on the Freemasonry subreddit. Do you have a chamber of reflection in which to meditate? And it's short and sweet.
Well, in Texas, the Chamber of Reflection is not allowed under Grand Lodge law. Although I did get to spend some time at the Grand Lodge of Puerto Rico, which also houses, I believe, 4 Blue Lodges and a Scottish Rite and a York Rite. So their Masonic Grand Lodge was actually a home of a very prominent leader in Puerto Rico. And upon his death, he deeded it to become the new Grand Lodge building. Within the Grand Lodge building, his remains are actually interned inside the Grand Lodge building. Underneath that is their Chamber of Reflection, which is super cool. You walk down a winding staircase into a basement area, and they have candle holders set up. So you're walking down only in the candlelight, and you go underneath and you go down further and you lean back and you turn and you go into a chamber of reflection that is black and set up with symbolism of life and death, and has questions written on the wall. I don't know if they'd want me letting those questions out, but they were thought provoking, regarding your intents, your what you intended to get out of Masonry. And we actually went down there, and I asked the worshipful master of the lodge we were visiting if I could take some time and just, can you close me in and can I just sit here for a little bit? And he was happy to oblige my rather odd request. Our worshipful master was looking at me like I was a crazy person. Anyways, so I took some time, and you can almost hear the spirits in the building when you're in that room with the door shut and it's dark, and you can't see anything, and it was a very, very cool experience that I think really would add to the initiatic experience of our candidates. However, our Grand Lodge does not allow such a room, but it really, I think it adds just another layer to it, and thinking about the nerves that you have coming into your entered apprentice degree, and you're not sure what to expect, and you're not sure what you're doing or where you're going or what's going to happen, and the idea of going down a set of stairs into a basement under the remains of a past Grand Master and locked in a room with a little candle, and these questions written on the wall that make you think, oh my God, what have I done? Why am I here? Whew. Guys, very, very cool experience just to go down there and sit and think about, okay, if I was there that night, what would it have been? And I think chambers of reflection would be a great idea. But that being said, not allowed. We don't have one, but I've seen a very, very well done chamber of reflection, and it could really add to the experience for sure.
Yeah, and my thoughts are, if we're concerned that they're going to cause issue and shed a bad light, let's come up with a way to do it that is Masonic etiquette. So we don't want to put the skull in it right off the bat and go traditional chamber of reflection. Okay, great. You know what I mean? We got to ease into it. I wish they would come up with something that says, hey, you can do this for the EA, this for the fellow crap, to make it kind of unique and specific. Nothing really off the wall, but just kind of a special room, as opposed to, at best, it looks like an empty closet. At worst, it looks like a storage room, and there's old moldy shoes and filing cabinets and what have you, to where there should be some give there. And if they're really concerned, put that on the DDGM checklist. If you apply to have one to Grand Lodge and it gets approved, you get looked at every year, to make sure you're not putting chicken bones in there or something. Because I understand some guys might go off the wall and just do something goofy. So I think it does need some sort of guidance or regulation, but
Man, it's like that kid on the playground that swung the swings too high and hurt himself. So they take down the swings for everybody else. Like, come on, guys. Like, if we stay reasonable, we could have this experience in our lodges, and it would be awesome.
Well, and it hit me hard when I looked at Grand Lodge Law from 1862, I think it was. I found a book at some antique store. I was like, yeah, I'll take that. It was a few bucks. It is literally, it fits in your back pocket. It's like 80 pages of this little bitty, like an old monitor or little brother if you have one. It's a little bitty. You can read it in half an hour. My Grand Lodge Law book now, it is like 6 inches thick.
My Grand Lodge Law book is about the size. It's about 4.5 inches long and 2.5 inches wide, and it's about the width of a cell phone. I have them all on PDFs because it's not worth my time thumbing through stuff. But now the Chamber of Reflection is a sad fact where people got scared, and it's the same reason why we don't have Knight Templar aprons anymore. Oh, skull and crossbones, very scary, right?
Yeah. And I'm not super up to speed on the history. I know there were some Chamber of Reflections early in Masonic history in America.
Yeah. Well, and I can tell you that it goes all the way back to the history in England, right?
It's much more prevalent there. But it just didn't make it across for some reason.
Let's see.
Well, I think
earliest.
it wouldn't surprise me if it was here, and then it was one of the things that got taken out there in the Morgan affair, right?
Yeah, well, from what little I know, there were patches of lodges that had Chamber of Reflection. Like, it wasn't a widespread thing back when Freemasonry was taking hold in the early, or the 1700s or whatever.
Well, but there are references to it in the 1700s, right? Like there was
for sure.
There's an expose called Le Secret de Franc-Maçon, right? Which is like the secrets of the Freemasons, right? And there's another one called Jachin and Boaz, which is a English exposure of the ritual, and that one was published in 1762. And it says here, hold on, it's a long passage, but basically he says he's conducted into another room which is totally dark, and then asked whether he's conscious of having the vocation necessary to be received. On answering yes, he's asked his name, surname, and profession. When he's asked these questions, whatever he has about him made of metal is taken off, as buckles, buttons, rings, boxes, and even the money in his pocket is taken away. Then they make him uncover his right knee and put his left foot with his shoe on into a slipper, hoodwink him with a handkerchief, and leave him to his reflection for about half an hour. The chamber is also guarded within and without by some of the brethren who have drawn swords in their hands to keep off all strangers in any case should dare approach. The person who proposed the candidate stays in the room with him, but they are not permitted to ask any questions or converse together. So, like, we know stuff, like, all the way back to the 1760s in England and the 1740s in France. Like, we have a history of this existing, right?
Well, and that's kind of my point, is that if you go across the pond into early Freemasonry, it was very prevalent. Almost every lodge seemed to have one. Mm-hmm. But when Freemasonry jumped over to America in the early formation of America, it just didn't seem as prevalent. There were patches, don't get me wrong, that had them, but it wasn't as prevalent as it was at the same time across the pond. And they still use them quite frequently. I mean, Grant, you guys went to Puerto Rico, right?
Yeah.
And that one looks spooky as heck.
Yeah, that one was crazy.
Did Greg drop those photos on our Facebook page?
Yeah.
And I went through them and I translated them from Spanish into English.
Yeah, it was wicked stuff.
Some of it was Spanish that I'm not familiar with because the Puerto Rican dialect of Spanish is slightly different from the one that I speak. So it's like some of it was like, I don't know if this is just me being bad at Spanish or if it's a dialectal issue, but it was cool.
I asked him, because I don't speak or read Spanish, so I asked him, what are these questions? And then reflected on those questions, and it was like, man, this is super duper cool. Mm-hmm. and I want to do this with our candidates because I not because I want to scare the candidates and not because I want to make them reconsider becoming a Mason or do anything below board with them, right? It's because I want to provide a better experience for those guys. And I firmly believe that it would add to the experience, but you just can't.
And I get where Grand Lodge is coming from, because if you look at our fraternity on the whole, on large, statistically, most of or I don't want to say most, but a lot of lodges in Texas struggle to even confer their own degrees. Mm-hmm. So what is the motivation to let loose on something like Chamber of Reflection when you come into what's a nice word to use? You come in on a degree that's not done well.
Yeah.
It's self-defeating, So we do got to get our house in order a little bit before that. I think So it's not something I think we need tomorrow, but there are lodges that are ready for that kind of thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I went to a lecture that the Right Worshipful Jim Rumsey gave, and thinking about it, he said in the late 1800s there was a period where they tried to take, like there was an effort to religionize, I guess if that's a word. You know, they tried to take religion out of the Texas ritual, and it wouldn't surprise me if that was part of it, right? In an effort to try and make it accessible or something that you didn't have to give any kind of, you know, weird answers to, that people would look at you, you know, differently, you know, that there was an effort to take anything mystical out of the ritual.
No, yeah, and you're right. And I think there were some in Texas. I'm trying to think of what book I read it in. Maybe it was Roberto's, where he had a good history of Chamber of Reflection. What was this book called? Masonic Experience.
The True Masonic Experience.
Yes.
Right.
But it just wasn't prevalent. It didn't catch on in our culture. So I don't think it would have survived, you know, even if it had made it through that period. Because there was, you know, that was Morgan Affair. There was we kind of desensitized everything. And then again, the 80s, the same thing happened. I mean, it was like Masonry was under attack.
Right. And it seems to be the knee-jerk reaction to those attacks is, oh, let's, you know, kind of, you know, take anything mystical out and try to make it accessible to everybody.
Yeah. In a way, it's defending ourselves against ignorant claim, you know, ignorant people, I guess. And we're told what we're supposed to do in that situation in our EA charge.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the idea that we're going to remove from the experience we could be providing, you know, what if everyone has their favorite part of each degree they went through, right? There was something that spoke to them, something that hit home and made it real and made it part of, it became their motivator, right, to stay there. Well, what if that's the thing that's missing for one of your candidates? What if someone goes through their EA degree and goes, and not that your work should do better than this, but what if they go through the EA degree and go, meh, you know, maybe that type of experience would resonate with certain guys more than other parts of the degree. So
Yeah.
I think you just pull away from what people can do.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone knows my issues with federal and big group authorities. So, you know, I don't like being told by a big group of people that I can't do something. So this makes me want to do it even more. Not that I'm going to break Grand Lodge law, but I kind of want to, because it's a law, and you know.
Well, it's one of those things that motivates you to change it, you know. And I firmly believe there will be a moment in our lifetime that rule will change.
Right. And it's coming sooner rather than later, I think.
Yeah. Because there are a lot of lodges ready for it.
So,
right,
kind of in the same vein here, do any of y'all, and y'all already know what the answer is for me, but do any of y'all have a chamber of reflection of your own? Because you can't have one in the lodge, right?
I got 5 acres of it.
Yeah, but you live in God's country.
I put koi in my pond and goldfish. Oh, dude, I get out there for hours and feed them, and it's just mesmerizing. So, answer your question, no, I don't have the chamber of reflection set up, but I do a lot of reflecting.
Yep. So I am very grateful that this did not scare off my fiancée, but I have one in my house. It's in my bedroom for whatever reason. It was the only spot I had room. There's like a little alcove nook. I assumed that at one point in time it had a mirror and that it was a vanity of sorts, because it's got the right lighting setup to be a vanity. But instead, there's a fish bowl there that has some sand in it so I can jam incense sticks. There's a like a like a lampstand that has a very realistic acrylic skull on it, and there's a candle on top of the skull that melts down on top of it, and there's my giant Bible on a Bible stand, usually open to a random page that I pick occasionally. And then there's also on the back wall there is a painting of Eve. Of Eve being comforted by the Virgin Mary, who is stomping on the head of a snake, right? And so it's a little bit more. It's not necessarily a Masonic chamber of reflection, but it is very much inspired by that. And I tell you, like the first time she saw that, I was like, "Oh man, she's gonna leave. She's gonna freak out." And it's like, "Oh, okay." Like,
No, if we had a YouTube channel, you would be looking at Gabe. He's got a bookshelf behind him with, was that 4 skulls on top?
no, there's
Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
10
There's
skulls.
10 skulls of varying sizes on my bookshelf.
And then what looks like a fur jacket in his closet.
Hey now, that one is
this-
my fiance's.
This guy's as diverse as it gets.
Yeah. Although what you didn't notice is that next to Sarah's fur vest is a monk's robe.
That's what I'm talking about.
But that's what I wear that one to Renfest all the time. So
man.
slightly different purpose.
You can have a place to reflect. I have my sauna. I mean, that's where I go for quiet.
And I took that away from Chuck's podcast with him about it's just about a state of mind. It's not where you are.
Mm-hmm.
You should have your chamber of reflection should be, if you're on the sideline of a degree, the whole lodge is your chamber of reflection. You should be contemplating and reflecting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The sauna is a great example of somewhere where you can go and just your thoughts get drained out of you.
Now,
sir.
This is actually something that I don't entirely agree with Chuck on, which, like, it's a great idea, right? But I'm a big believer in having a workspace, right? Like, it's a workspace that, like, when you show up to your desk in the morning, right? Like, you work most efficiently when you have a clean desk space, when all your papers have been put away and you pull things out as you need them, or they're already prepared for you, right? The only thing you try to do in that workspace is work, right? To me, it makes a lot of sense to have a dedicated space, even if it's just the corner of a room where maybe you have a seat that's pointing at the wall, right? So you stare at the blank wall and you don't have any interference. Or if it's a whole room in your house that is like the quiet room,
Yeah.
And there's just a couple little pillows in there that you can sit on or whatever, right? Or maybe it's a guest room that is not 70% of the year is not used, right? I believe that you should have a space that is dedicated to quiet time, right? For reflection, for reading, for study. So it doesn't have to be just reflection, but it needs to be a quiet room. That is all that is.
Well, I guess everyone has something to add to that. Hey, Billy, you go first, man.
Well, I mean, it does make sense, right? Because meditation, like most other things we do, whether we realize it or not, is a ritual. And so it helps to have a ritually dedicated space. I honestly used to have an area of my home or apartment set aside for meditation when I was younger. It gets a little bit harder when you have kids. Not only, is it harder to, keep that space clean, but it's also sometimes harder to find that quiet time when you can actually reflect and meditate. So for that reason, so my oldest son has moved out in his room. Honestly, I do want to use it to set up something like that again. Now that my kids are older and I can get some more quiet space. But I think there should be an area that is, if you're going to do meditation, especially as a ritual, it should be ritually prepared.
Yes, I agree, Billy. My spot had, cell phones are not allowed in the sauna. In fact, my old one broke, and I went 3 weeks without it, and I was a very frustrated person because I did not have my time to meditate and reflect. You know,
Yeah.
the new one is in. It works great. It's not as nice as the last one, but whatever, it works.
No, my whole thing with it is that if you look at our culture today, way more people have really probably never even tried to meditate in the sense that you're talking about, Gabe, where they sit, try to be still. I guess that's like Zen meditation, where you clear your thoughts, all that kind of stuff. That's like jumping in a race car that's got NOS and you've never drove a race car. For me, I want to make sure and emphasize that you don't necessarily think that's the only way, because I think it's important to have that, and you would work your way up. As soon as you start seeing the value of stopping and actually appreciating the moment, you're going to find more and more ways to dig in. Because if you really want to get deep in the moment, you do have to have that quiet spot. When I'm out by the pond, I could get distracted by a car or whatever. When I'm in my quiet spot, it's just all my head.
Yeah. And you don't necessarily have to devote the quiet spot just to meditation. Like, it can be a reading nook that like, let's say that's where you put, it can be your home office, right? But maybe not your modern home office, right? Because when I think of a home office, I think of computers, right?
Yeah.
But like, we're thinking maybe a more traditional library office room, right? Like, not everybody's going to have the opportunity to do that, right?
Yeah.
But you say, okay, this is the room where I read and where I write, and there's going to be a desk where I have a pen and paper, and I have bookshelves, and I have a little chair in the corner that I can sit in and meditate in, and then I have, religious texts on hands, because this is also my prayer room. This is also my quiet time with God room. This is my writing room, my reading room, whatever. But all of these are quiet activities, right? Unless you enjoy loudly screaming prayer at the top of your lungs, which, I mean, I'm not going to knock you for that. But let's say you live in an apartment, right, and you don't have a lot of spot. Then you just say, okay, I'm going to take this little corner of my apartment, and I'm going to put a little cushion there, and if I want to go read, then I'm going to go sit on that cushion, and I'm going to go read. If I want to go pray, I'm going to go kneel on that cushion and pray. Or if I'm going to go meditate, I'm going to go sit on that cushion and stare at the wall, or do whatever activity that I have deemed appropriate for myself as a contemplative exercise. So just to have, like, even if it's just a corner of an apartment, just to have a spot where, like, only quiet things happen here. Let's see. I think this one will be good for Billy and myself, since we're members. What is the Grand College of Rites? Is it useful? And how do I join?
I'll hit the mute button.
Not from this one.
Nah, I'm gonna encourage Grant and Rhit to join. But
Yeah.
Billy and I are both members of the Grand College of Rites. It's a research organization. The way that I like to explain it to people is that in the same way that AMD keeps old and weird degrees alive, the Grand College of Rites keeps old and weird degrees dead, right? And that's usually because they were being used by spurious organizations, right? So a lot of this stuff is clandestine, right? So they have these things called collectanea, which are like little research journals, and you pay, I think it's like what, $35 a year, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
It's something like that. It's not a whole lot of money. But you pay that, and they send you collectanea every year, and it's like, one might be like Memphis and Mizraim degrees. Another one might be like the American Masonic Federation degrees, right? And all these are like super clandestine, right? Some of them are regular Masonic rites that just kind of died off too, right? Like it doesn't have to be clandestine, but the Grand College of Rites goes in and they purchase the degrees, not the degrees, the rights to the degree ritual. So if an organization comes up and they pop out of nowhere, like clandestine organizations tend to do, and they start using, let's say, the American Masonic Federation's ritual, then the Grand College of Rites owns the rights to that degree, and they can sue that organization into the ground if need be. It's a good tool for regularity and a good tool for preserving interesting Masonic information. Billy, did you want to chime in on the GCR?
Sure. Yeah. It's so I wouldn't say it's a place where ritual goes to die. It's instead, as Gabriel said, for ritual that's already dead and it's just memorialized. So I find it's really cool to look through some of the old ritual for reference. But yeah, you can't use any of it, but that doesn't mean there's things you can't learn from it.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So is it considered tiled? In other words, can we talk about some of this stuff?
You can
How
talk
deep
about
does
any
that
of it.
go?
It's
You
in
can talk
print
about any
material.
of it. So you guys could get me and Rhit prints of that, right? Or do we have to be members to get those prints? How does that work?
So I could loan you a copy of mine, I could loan you my copy that I purchased. I could not make a copy for you because it is copyrighted material that belongs to the Grand College of Rites. But
Okay.
if you wanted to borrow one of the issues of Collectania from me, I could loan it to you. But in order to purchase one, you would have to be a member of the Grand College of Rites.
That's
So
okay.
it's kind of
that's
like-
where I was trying to get to. Like, can I go get this on Amazon and read this like now? Maybe?
This is not the kind of stuff you'd be able to find on Amazon because I mean, like they're going all the way from like Cerno Scottish Rite, like the old Cerno Scottish Rite degrees, to like the Martinist order, stuff like that. It's basically kind of like how the Scottish Rite Research Society sends you stuff every year if you're a member of that, or how the Texas Lodge Research Society sends you their journal annually. Their collection just happens to be weird old rituals.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So speaking of old rituals, I had one of the questions I want to ask if we got time.
Sure, we got time.
So it's something that I've really been thinking about a lot. And when I was first made an EA, the law had just changed. I think it was 2004, maybe 2003, that we had optional ways to open up our lodge, where you could open up on the EA or Fellowcraft and close. Should we do away with that?
Interesting. Now, our current situation is that we can open up like that, right?
Yep, you can open straight to the EA. You don't have to do anything. You have the optional way, and it's commonly called the short form, to where you just give the EA sign, you just give the EA prayer, and that's as far as it goes. You can open and close. Prior to that, you had to open a Master Mason's Lodge, call it to refreshment, and double down to whatever degree you were going into, EA or Fellowcraft.
Now, Rhit, what would be the positive of not being able to do the short form?
That's what I was going to ask, because I was going to say, like, I don't know if there's a benefit to not doing that.
So let me ask you this. Why do you think up until 2003, 2002, for all that time in Texas, why do you think they required them to open a Master Mason's Lodge? That's better than 150 years.
To preserve the ritual?
Yes, that's true. But why do you think? Because everything has a purpose, right? And we all have our interpretation and opinion on the purpose. What do you think they required that for so long?
So one thing I would wager to guess, and this is just a wild ass guess, is that it used to be the case that lodges were big enough that if you had a whole room of people voting on a subject, there were enough people in the lodge that you might not know who was an entered apprentice and who was a Fellowcraft and who was a Mason.
So just
So
my understanding is early in Grand Lodge law, EAs had voting rights.
Okay, so then
Okay.
scrap that theory.
Yep.
Okay, so
So-
that's
And-
wrong.
And most, I say most, there was a lot of business conducted on the EA, but, they commonly open at a master's for stated meeting. But
Then I'm at a total loss.
So my theory was that originally I thought stated meetings had to be open in a Master Mason's degree. And so that it was a way to allow EAs to actually be able to sit in lodge and maybe help retain them by getting them involved earlier.
so you're right. I mean, prior to our change in 2003, whenever it was, you had to open stated in a master's. EAs and fellow crafts couldn't attend. And that was the big thing. Let's get them involved early. And the opposition said, well, then they'd have nothing to work for. That's part of the enticement to become a Master Mason is to finally sit in stated meeting and see what goes on.
For
Of course,
better or worse.
Yeah, I can see all three of you rolling your eyes like, what, how is that a carrot at the end of the stick? And
Yeah.
we have been very successful in integrating our EAs in it. I mean, it's been great for us. But think about it more in a ritualistic form. So when you close the EA, you give the EA sign and you close this willy-nilly way. But think about how that Master Mason's Lodge closes. There's a very surreal moment. If you guys know what I'm talking about, where the Worshipful Master goes to the Senior Warden and all that, and it's different from the EA and Fellowcraft. So given those signs remind us to act the lessons of the EA, the Fellowcraft, the Masters, so on and so forth. And you don't get that when you're opening in a regular lodge. So I understand if we're looking at it from a point of slimming our time,
Procedural.
the short form makes sense. But if we're talking about really impressing upon the lessons of what we're doing as Master Masons, to me, it's starting to make more and more sense that we should take the time and open that Master's Lodge and double down, because we are Master Masons. And we should be reminded of that every time we go to lodge to open and do business. But for us, I mean, we open a Master's Lodge when we do that degree or when we receive the DDGM, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we rarely get reminded of those three questions, our map as a Mason, how we meet, act, and part. And those should be powerful enough to where we want to hear them when we're at lodge. But it's the auspice of the energy that should be conveyed at opening and closing has kind of been put to the wayside. It's like, well, yeah, we got to do that. So let's make it short. And if it happened when the boomers were in charge.
And we've thrown a generation under the bus.
Let's throw some shade out there.
Well, and you guys know, especially you, Gabe and Grant, that they think millennials that was what they said. They want it shorter and quicker.
No.
They don't have time for all this. And it's the exact opposite.
So
And here
this
we
gives
are.
us actually a fantastic. So apologies to our boomer listeners, but these comments happen, and
I don't mean it as a slight. But
no, but also I would like to say that occasionally we will talk about different generations. These are not necessarily meant as slights against individuals in these generations, but there are definitely generational trends that have occurred. So that's all I'm going to say on that subject.
Well,
You changed my mind on this, by the way. I thought it was well, no, we should just, if we have the option, then why not exercise it?
Yeah, that's the mentality.
This seems like a much better idea.
I mean, we are charged to be contemplative in nature, and we should be set back to go in the world with a little energy. And I see that closing as that opportunity, because the master's closing is way more beautiful than the other two.
Oh, absolutely. It gives me goosebumps.
Yeah.
And to kind of further what you're saying, just thinking on it, I remember when I was an entered apprentice and we would close in the entered apprentice degree, I would get a certain recharge and a certain feel of, yeah, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
When you close in that master's degree, I can see your point, man, where it would give you kind of a recharge, give you kind of a feel, right? Um,
If it's done right, it should.
well, and we like to do our degree work right.
Yep.
You know, and so we had a master's degree recently, and just kind of thinking about that, that did kind of give me a little bit of a recharge and kind of a bump. I like that.
And
I don't know. I don't know if we should mandate either way. I mean, that kind of
no.
seems a little federalistic. Not a huge fan of that, but it, you know, if say you had a worshipful master that wanted to make sure it was done on each meeting his year, maybe he should do that. That would be cool.
At least make it a little more common. You know what I mean? Because learning to double down is something that is kind of a forgotten art. It's a little tricky, but it's totally doable. They did it for over a century, you know. But there is something to it because that energy you get from that closing, it doesn't last very long. You know, maybe a couple days. So you need it on the regular basis. But if it becomes something just droning, like, yeah, answer question, ask question, it short form it. Yeah.
Yeah, you suck all the life out of it. Why bother, right?
You got it.
But you mentioned something. I wanted to use that as a segue to one of Billy's questions, in regards to the old millennials question that you had written down. So, Billy, tell us about this question and these ideas that you'd noticed.
Okay, well, and so it's not really a question. It's more of a comment about there was a Facebook poll that was done recently by Brother Kyle Walquist, I believe, and then it was talked about by Brother Brad Billings that had some very surprising results over, you know, what is it that millennials actually want from their Freemasonry? And the thing that kind of made me laugh because it goes totally against how the older mindset seems to have, you know, decided was the truth, was rather than want easier ritual or an easier path to becoming a master mason, it seemed like a significant number of millennials who took the test actually believe that the ritual is good as it is, or may even like to have it harder.
Yeah. It's like completely opposite of what the older generation says they want.
Yeah.
And
Right.
something I'm realizing is that's no different than every single generation that comes through. You know, the only thing I pray is I'm not that old guy one day that's like these whippersnappers.
Well,
You know,
and yeah, I can see that. But the big question becomes to me is at this point, the focus needs to not be on the millennials. You'll get. I don't want to say that Masonry has lost the millennial generation, but I think the guys in the millennial generation that are interested are largely involved at this point. And I think we need to take this lesson and learn that we don't know what the next generation expects out of Masonry. We got to ask.
Yeah. That's what I'm getting out of it is as a millennial guy, right? You know, as a 20-something, it drives me up the wall when people go, "This is what millennials want," and I'm like, I don't want any of that. I don't care. Like, you're not a millennial.
Yeah.
You don't like. It's fine. We can get along, and I'm totally cool with having discussions. But please stop pretending like you know what I want. And so Brad's presentation was I think it was like the only time I've ever seen somebody give a talk about millennials who was a millennial, you know? One of the things that I say a lot to brethren is you'll notice that the only people worrying about millennials are not millennials. So that's the lesson that I'm going to take to heart here with, I guess, Generation Z and Alpha, you know? with Generation Z and Generation Alpha, I'm not going to pretend like I know what these kids want, you know?
Yeah.
I'm not going to pretend like I understand. I'm just going to try and get to know them, you know? Cause,
Yeah. You're going to try to understand.
And you know, I know some of I know some kids that are, you know, like I interact with the D-Malays and the Rainbow Girls a lot at the temple and stuff, and they'll talk to me about stuff they're super into, and I go, I did not think that I would already be feeling like an old man in my 20s, you know, because I have no idea what they're talking about or why they're so fascinated by it, and that's okay. Like, you know, everyone likes a different thing, you know, and so
You're
I just try
listening
and hang out with
and
them.
you're asking the questions, and I think really the the failure, the decline in Masonry we have seen is not a result of what Masonry is. It's a failure to listen to the questions that you asked of the next generation. We failed to listen, and I think that failure may, I wasn't there, but if I had to guess, it may be historic, and you're seeing a historic decline. Um, each generation, we've seen a decline now for what, 60 years? How long? How long have we been on
Yes.
decline? Something like that. So
Yep. Pretty
yeah,
close.
yeah, pretty close to 60 years at this point. So when we look at that, we gotta figure out a way to change that pattern, because we can't do it. I don't think we could afford to do it for another 60 years. You know.
Bill Crow said something that really hit home with me. That I know you guys know him. He's a greatest generation Mason, and he's really interested in connecting with millennials. And he talks about it being a two-way street. You know, millennials and the greatest generation don't have the greatest way to communicate with each other. There's just a generational gap so large. There is no filter. There's no father to son to grandfather kind of filter. We lost that with the baby boomers because they didn't join anything. And then Xers didn't either. I'm one of the few Generation X in the fraternity, and forget about them. They're gone.
Right.
But, things change so drastically here recently in how things are conducted in society. Because if you think about from the 20s until really the late 90s, business was done exactly the same way. You had your black book, you networked. Society just meshed in a certain way for so long, and all the nomenclature and vocabulary and everything just went from father to son in Masonry and society. That isn't the case anymore. I don't go to my dad when the lawnmower breaks. I go to YouTube. You're dealing with people that it is such a drastic change in society, and the greatest generation and really the boomers haven't kept up and can't even really wrap their head around how millennials do business nowadays. And it's obviously much more successful, as it should be. Each generation gets more successful, in the business world. So we have to get some of that into Freemasonry. The trick is millennials being able to communicate with greatest generation and vice versa, because they still have the most pull in our craft, but it's just so drastic. So to get them to understand how powerful Facebook is like trying to get somebody who saw an airplane for the first time understanding how that works. Because for us, it's just foregone conclusion. We understand the physics, the lift nowadays. But if you're riding on a buggy and you saw an airplane fly over, you're thinking, dang, that thing, how's that not falling out of the sky? You know what I mean? So that's the real trick, is to get them to understand that. And whether it'll happen or not, I don't know.
Well, that's a tough topic, man. Trying
It
to
is.
open that line of communication and it is a two-way street. I agree with you there. We got to get as much knowledge from that greatest generation as we can, right?
Yeah.
As fast as we can.
No, there's something to it, but I mean, it's tricky, because our lodge, it certainly has its pros and cons, but we didn't have a lot of older guys that we had to fight. We were almost a dead lodge, and most of the active members were young. I say most, there was 5 of us. And my dad was the only one over 50. So, we didn't have a lot of those obstacles. But if you have a lot of active past masters, which is a great thing, you've really got to include them on the process and take the time to get them to understand. Otherwise, it's just change, and everybody fights that, right? It's another one we could make a whole podcast on, huh?
Yeah, I guess so.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've half done that podcast 3 or 4 times over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
We get into that rabbit hole and get going.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think
Yep.
that's a bias on our part as younger guys, right? Like that's something that seems to affect us, whether it's in our, obviously not so much in our lodge, but whether it's regionally or in different bodies or whatever. That's something that we're affected by. So I think we do have a bias towards going towards this discussion, but I don't know that that's a bad thing.
No.
It kind of feels like a call of distress to a certain extent. So
No. Yeah, and you just got to realize how things are, it's hard to imagine what it's like being old when you're young. It's easy to imagine what it's like being young when you're old. You know what I mean? So you got to meet somewhere in the middle.
all right. Well,
That sounds like wrap-up time.
it does. So, gentlemen, this has been a great discussion. I'm really glad we did this Quarryman's Roundtable. I'm looking forward to doing another one in a couple months.
Yes.
But tonight's, usually we have a fraternal quote of the week. This is just a quote of the week. The author of the quote was not a Mason, but he was a dear friend of many Masons. We cannot make events. Our business is wisely to improve them. There has been much to do to confirm doubting friends and fortify the timid. It requires time to bring honest men to think and determine alike, even in important matters. Mankind are governed more by their feelings than by reason. That was our founding father, Samuel Adams, the 4th governor of Massachusetts, in a letter to his friend Samuel Cooper on April 30th, 1776.
Good stuff.
So a monumentous year for American history.
Yep.
So, gentlemen, is there anything that from tonight's discussion that particularly stuck with you?
Just be curious. Don't be afraid to ask questions and contemplate what you're a part of. That's what I love about these roundtables. We just get to shoot the breeze about things that have intrigued our curiosity.
I would say don't be afraid to have a conversation and have your opinion changed. I mean, that happened tonight on the short form lodge for me. I hadn't really
Same here.
thought too much about it, but you open up these conversations and you get a perspective. I mean, I talk to Rhit all the time. We had never talked about that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, and it's something
It's
I was just recently convinced of, which I got a whole paper I'm going to present at Lodge about it. Good,
of course.
Good stuff. It's good stuff.
All right. So I really enjoyed the conversation about, contemplation and meditation, especially in your own home, right? I think it's something that we underutilize, but something that is very necessary, especially in our technological world where it seems like everything is constant distraction. So it's very nice to be able to have a moment to sit down and just kind of block all the distraction out and focus on what's important. And a lot of times you don't even know what's important until you sit down and have that quiet moment. I know at work, if I feel like I'm spinning my wheels and I'm not getting much accomplished on a project, sometimes I find it helps that before I start my day, I just spend about 30 minutes with a pad and a pencil right next to me, just still my mind and just kind of go over what my goals are for that day, for that week, for that month, and just try to quietly contemplate what it is exactly I'm trying to do. And then as soon as I come out of it, I grab that pen and paper and just go to town writing. And before I know it, I have, 10 pages of stuff. But I wouldn't have had any of that epiphany or, any of that come to me if I wouldn't have taken the moment to just block out the distraction.
Right. And so this discussion in general has brought to me. This is it's meant cynically, but I like to take it at face value, actually. Is one of the best definitions I've ever heard for what Freemasonry is that Freemasonry is a bunch of Masons sitting in a room arguing about what Masonry is. So, and I prefer the term discussing
That's a
what
good
Masonry is.
description.
But yeah, we're just,
Yeah.
that's what Masonry
Right.
is. It's a
That's
bunch of
solid.
Masons sitting in a room trying to figure out what the heck Masonry is, you know? There's our great 21st century Western mystery tradition, y'all. We don't know
Actually,
what the
that's
hell we're
not
doing.
It's not a bad catchphrase, you know.
Right?
Masonry is
Masons trying to
Masons
figure
sitting in a
out
room trying to
Masonry.
figure out what Masonry is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so, listeners, thank y'all for tuning in. We really appreciate y'all, and we'll hope to see y'all in 2 weeks.
Sounds good. This is Rhit Moore signing off.
Grant Gates signing off.
Billy Hamilton signing off.
And Gabe Jagush signing off.